Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military with Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 25th of July of 2025. Today we have a lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And finally we answered the culmination of the summer military campaign of 2025, because currently several major battles are underway and everything depends on them, whether the Russians are able to move much further and deeper inside of the territory of Ukraine, or the Russians would be forced to stop along the current situation, along the current line of combat contact, and to accept the Ukrainian demands in the negotiation process, and probably at least partially Ukrainian terms in the same issue, in the same question. So let's discuss everything in details, and one of the major battles are taking place around the city and the Pokrovsk agglomeration, where the Russians continue their offensive operation, and during the previous 24 hours the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly, especially in the northeastern direction and the southwestern directions. So when comparing the current situation with the situation we discussed during the previous video, we haven't received almost anything additional, but we have something additional, so let's discuss this also in details. First, let's repeat once again what we have by the end of the 25th of July of 2025. First of all, and the most important, is that the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to improve their position significantly in the northeastern part of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. Basically, the city of Novoekonomichne was taken by the Russians. This report was provided us yesterday in the evening by the end of the 24th of July, somewhere at 6 p.m. of Moscow time. The Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes, the group of forces center managed to take under complete control the settlement. Based on this report, lots of mappers adjusted their maps in Russian favor, and this morning, by this morning of the 25th of July, the pro-Russian resources published this video. And here we can see how exactly the battle for the city of Novoekonomichne was taking place. First, the Russians launched artillery preparation, then the Russians secured and destroyed basements and positions of the armed forces of Ukraine with FPV drones, and then the Russian infantry entered the city. And after the Russians secured the area, they raised several flags in different parts of the settlement. The most important flag, as you can see, was raised in the central part of the city, in the vicinity of the central church of the city of Novoekonomichne. So this is exactly the place where the Russians raised their flag. So based on this video, most of the mappers once again adjusted their maps finally in the area of the city of Novoekonomichne. So no doubts that the settlement was taken, and no doubts that the Russians during the previous 24 hours moved further in the western direction, and most likely currently the clashes are taking place for the dense network of the fortifications that is located to the west of the city of Novoekonomichne. We're talking about this stronghold, and of course we're talking about the mine by the name of Komsomolskaya. The Ukrainians most likely will try to slow down the Russians in this area, but it seems that Ukrainians will not be able to do this, because the Russians are going to attack this area not just from the east and the western direction. According to information we have, during the next days, and maybe the Russians have already done this, the Russians will attack, or attacking already, the city of Mirnograd from the north. At least during the previous 24 hours, very heavy artillery preparation was recorded exactly in this area. In this video we can see how the Russians destroyed another stronghold of the armed forces of Ukraine, and maybe the Russians destroyed this stronghold right before the beginning of another offensive operation. So the Russians may try to test Ukrainian defense exactly using these routes of attack, and the thing is that Ukrainians have very well fortified area to the east of Mirnograd. We are talking once again about this dense network of the fortifications. We have strongholds not just here, we have strongholds here. So too many strongholds in this area for assault operation. Obviously the Russians will suffer huge losses if they decide to move exactly this way. But if Russians decide to attack Ukrainians' positions from the north, let's say by taking under control the most northern part of Mirnograd, this can lead to complete collapse of Ukrainian defense along this dense network of the fortifications, and the Russians will take this territory without any resistance from the Ukrainian side. So we are waiting for additional updates. As you can see, we haven't received almost anything, just several geolocations like this one. Now let's talk about the southwestern flank of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. Once again, we discussed a lot. Let's repeat once again. The Russians, according to the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, secured the village of Zverova, and this village was secured, and the Russians published this report at the same time with the report about the city of Novoekonomichne. But there are very important differences between these two villages and cities. The Russians published at least several videos with flags in the area of Novoekonomichne, but when talking about Zverova, we still haven't received anything that can confirm Russian control over this territory. The only thing we have is the report of the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation. Anyway, the situation remains tense in this area according to several sources, and during the previous 24 hours we got just one but very important update. We're talking about this map that was published by very reliable pro-Russian resources, and according to them, the Russians managed to break through Ukrainian defense not just on the outskirts of the city of Pokrovsk and its agglomeration. The Russians managed to dig in deeper, much deeper inside of the city of Pokrovsk, and the Russians, according to this map, according to several pro-Russian resources, almost completely secured the most important and the most central part of the city of Pokrovsk. More precisely and especially, the Russians managed to take under complete control the territory along the railways. So, according to this mapper, the Russians secured this territory, or at least the Russians took under complete control and fire control over the territory. And the most important, that this territory was secured not by, let's say, the regular army of the Russian forces, of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. This territory was captured, or this territory got under fire complete control with sabotage and reconnaissance groups, so the Russians' famous DRG. So what does it mean? So let's discuss this in details, because this progress, this report is very important. So it doesn't mean that the Russians have, let's say, stable connections between the area of the railways and, let's say, the settlement of Zverova. Probably the Russians are encircled in this area, but this is exactly what they were tasked for, to answer this part, to cut this territory, to be encircled by Ukrainians, but not to allow the Ukrainians to communicate, let's say, successfully between the northern and the southern part. So once again, if you take a look at the city of Pokrovsk, you're gonna see that the city is cut by the railways in two parts. There are railways, as you can see, and the railways goes from the east of the city in the western direction, from the western in the eastern direction, and these railways cut the city of Pokrovsk in two parts: the northern one, this one, and the southern one. So as you can see, the Russians, according to this mapper, managed to take under complete control the railways, the central part of the railways, which means that currently Ukrainians almost have no possibilities to bring their forces from the northern part of the city of Pokrovsk in the southern part. If you remember, during the previous months, the Russians destroyed every single bridge in this area, and the only way how to bring forces, let's say, from the northern part of the city of Pokrovsk to the southern part of Pokrovsk, through these railways. But the problem is that the distance that Ukrainians need to cross, let's say, between the northern parts of the city and the southern part, varies from almost 500 meters in the western part of the city, and let's say around 120 meters in the eastern and in the central part. And believe me, this is probably the most craziest adventure for any soldier, both for the Russian and for the Ukrainians, to cross these 120 meters or 450 meters under open air, under the fire of Russian sabotage and reconnaissance group, and under the fire of Russian FPV drones. So, telling the truth, this is almost impossible. And when talking about this part of the city of Pokrovsk, if Ukrainians decide to send, let's say, 100 soldiers from one side to another, I believe that's maybe 50% or 60% of losses they will face during this adventure. So obviously this is impossible and this is unacceptable for the Ukrainians. So as for now, the Ukrainians in the central part of the city of Pokrovsk are focused to secure this territory, but the problem is that this is not something like another adventure from the Russian side to secure the central part of the city. This is a planned operation by the Russians to cut the south southern part from the northern part to reduce logistic and communication. And during this period of time, while the Russians are holding the central part, the regular army of the armed forces of the Russian Federation are trying to storm the most southern part of the city of Pokrovsk, the Pokrovsk citadel, this territory that is marked on this map with additional yellow layer. So, and the Russians, according to information we have already begun assault operation on these positions. In this video, for example, we can see how Russians were bombing and attacking this territory with TOS flamethrower systems. So there are very heavy clashes right now, and this report with Russian presence in the central part of the city changes the game completely. So it means that if Russians can be very successful in the southern part, the battle of the city of Pokrovsk and the Pokrovsk liberation could be the fastest battle for the city like this since the beginning of the special military operation. And as we discussed in the previous video, the southwestern part and the northeastern part of the Pokrovsk agglomeration are not the only areas where the Russians carrying out offensive operation. Also, according to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians launched another offensive, but this time along the railways in the direction of the settlement of Mirnograd, in the direction of its southern part. And as a result of clashes during the previous 24 hours, the Russians secured several strongholds in this area. So these two strongholds were taken, and the Russians managed to get the city of Mirnograd itself and to shorten the distance. It seems that the Russians are not going to assault this area, let's say, as we can see in the southwestern part of the city of Pokrovsk or in the northeastern part. It seems that the main purpose of the Russians is just to attack and to check whether the Ukrainians are going to hold their positions for a very long period of time, because according to information we have, the Ukrainians are disorganized in these three areas: northeastern part, southeastern part, and the city of Pokrovsk itself. And sometimes the Ukrainians don't understand where is the area of their responsibility and where is the area of responsibility of the next, let's say, group or the next brigades on the same line. So the Russians managed to cut, they managed to mess everything up for Ukrainians, and now we believe that the situation can intensify very fast and very soon in this area. Furthermore, as we discussed during the previous video, the Ukrainians announced evacuation of the next settlements in this direction, the settlement of Dobropolye. Most likely the Ukrainians will try to organize defense along this line with the purpose to slow down the Russians and not to allow them to answer the Dnipro region, to answer the Kharkiv region, and not to begin offensive operation further in the direction of the city of Kharkiv, but this time from the behind. So the situation for Zelensky and for Ukraine is very critical. As we discussed, we are at the culmination of the military summary campaign of 2025, and most likely everything will be resolved in the pocket of Pokrovsk, in the pocket of Konstantinovka, and in the area of the pocket of the city of Kupiansk. As for the city of Konstantinovka, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received many updates, just regular activities. The Russians were FPV droning Ukrainians all over the entire territory, lots of episodes, but as you can see, without changes on the ground. So most likely the Russians took small operational pause, but right before we started making this video, several pro-Russian resources published additional videos with Russian flags along the border between the settlement of Yablunovka, Alexandra Kalinova, and several pro-Russian resources reported that by the end of the 25th of July of 2025, the Russians managed to secure this settlement as well. So we are waiting for additional updates. If we get them, we will discuss them during the next update in the morning of the 26th of July of 2025. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the northern direction. Let's talk about the city of Kupiansk. During the previous 24 hours, as you can see, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly. First, let's compare the map between the dates. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 24th of July of 2025. The Russians had some foothold around the city of Kupiansk, and this is the situation by the end of the 25th of July. As you can see, during the previous 24 hours or during the previous days, the Russians managed to improve their positions to the west of Kondrashevka and to the northwest of the city of Kupiansk, and the Russians managed to shorten the distance and basically to answer the city of Kupiansk from the north. So when talking about entering the city of Kupiansk, this video was published by pro-Ukrainian resources, and here we can see how Ukrainians were attacking Russians that were attacking the city of Kupiansk from the north. Ukrainians attacked several buildings. Most likely the Ukrainian FPV drone operators were attacking Russia's sabotage and reconnaissance group, and that's it. But anyway, this is also very important. When talking about the progress on the ground in the western direction, here we can see this video, and here we can see several Russian soldiers that left their positions and came to the open field with the purpose to shake and wave with their hands to show this drone that these positions are under their control. So once again, at the beginning of this video, we could see a Russian soldier. Where is him? This is it. This is him, and he was waving with his hands, and then he returned back to his stronghold. So during this video, there were 2 episodes. This is the first place where the Russians raised their hands, and this is the second place. Based on this video, we adjusted the map. So most likely, currently, Ukrainians still control the settlement of Tishinkova, but the Russians managed to outflank the village from the east, from the south, and from the southwest with the purpose to cut supply lines. So it seems that the battle for this village is going to start very soon. This is another village. This is another position that the Russians can take under control and to improve their general foothold to the north and the northwest of the city of Kupiansk. So the situation, as you can see, is very difficult for Ukrainians, and this is going to be another battle that can lead to complete collapse of the entire line of combat contact under control of the armed forces of Ukraine from the city of Sumy towards the city of Zaporozhye. And when talking about the Zaporozhye direction, the situation here is also very difficult. The Russians during the previous 24 hours once again managed to improve their positions. According to different mappers, the Russians managed to get as close as possible the settlement of Stepnogorsk. So these are the changes on the ground that were provided us by different pro-Russian resources. But the most important is that according to pro-Ukrainian resources during the previous two or 3 days, first sabotage and reconnaissance group of the armed forces of the Russian Federation entered the 3rd micro-district of the city of Stepnogorsk. There were very heavy clashes between the Russians and the Ukrainians. As a result of clashes, the Russian sabotage and reconnaissance group was destroyed, probably something like this. At least this is information that we can find in the pro-Ukrainian resources. As for the Russian resources, they're denying anything, or at least they're not commenting anything about the situation. But it seems that the situation in the 3rd micro district is the same as the situation right now in the central part of the city of Pokrovsk. So it seems that the next days we're going to adjust the map in this area also in Russian favor. So let's wait and see what is going to be next, but it seems that the Russians began assault operation on the settlement of Stepnogorsk. So this is the situation. Furthermore, the Russians attacked several positions of the armed forces of Ukraine in the vicinity of Zaporozhye with Geraint drones. Here we can see a very powerful, very big temporary deployment point of the armed forces of Ukraine. Dozens of vehicles were recorded, and as a result of attack, the Russians managed to destroy this camp. Most likely, Ukrainians lost several vehicles, probably several temporary deployment points were also destroyed. And of course, the city, the Zaporozhye direction, the Pokrovsk direction, the Konstantinovka, the Kupiansk direction are very important, and the Russians are advancing. And it seems that the Russians in coming days are going to launch another offensive operation, and this time in the direction of the city of Siversk. During the previous 24 hours, also lots of videos and lots of geolocations were recorded in this area. And telling the truth, probably Siversk direction is the direction where we can find the biggest number of icons, the biggest number of different updates, because the Russians are not moving according to geolocations, but according to videos, the Russians are bombing and attacking this territory heavily, trying to reduce the entire city of Siversk to ruins, and then just then to begin their offensive operation. So we are waiting, and obviously the Russians will launch this offensive. And another important thing, that right before we started making this video, we got another video published from the Serebryanka forest, and according to this video, the Russians improved their position significantly. So according to several resources, the Russians all took under control almost everything to the east of this red line, and we will discuss this video in details during the next update. So it seems that Ukraine front line is collapsing. We see that Zelensky is not popular. He lost his popularity in Ukraine and in the Western countries after his scandal law restricting rights of the anti-corruption bodies. It seems that Ukraine have huge problems with not just in the military sphere, in the political sphere. We discussed during the previous days millions of Lotus that are flying from the south in the northern direction. So everything is bad that I see. And telling the truth, truth, I'm not sure how exactly Zelensky is going to get out of this situation. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.